Welcome back again to the Fedric's Lens. Most people looked at Elon Musk's bedside table and saw a strange collection of objects. A replica gun from Deus Ex, a couple of Diet Coke cans, a Dorge, some books, and one item that at first glance could easily be missed. A boxed George Washington flintlock display set. And that object matters more than it seems. Because this is not just an old-style pistol in a wooden case. It is not just patriotic decoration, and it is not just a collector's curiosity. It is something more specific. It is a portable piece of American founding mythology, a miniature theater of origin, a way of taking the emotional charge of the Revolution, the authority of George Washington, the image of national struggle, and compressing all of it into a beautiful object that can sit quietly on a table beside a bed. That is where this gets interesting. Because once you really look at it, the question is no longer, why is that object there? The real question becomes, what kind of person places a founding relic beside himself in the modern age? The answer begins with what the object actually is. The bedside table item appears to match a commercially sold George Washington boxed flintlock-style display set, a non-firing reproduction pistol, a presentation box, a plaque or signature element, and a reproduction of Washington crossing the Delaware placed in the lid. That matters because it tells us this was not built as a weapon first. It was built as memory first, display first, theater first. And that changes everything. A real battlefield weapon belongs to a world of danger, mud, fear, and uncertainty. A replica display weapon belongs to a world of curated symbolism. The violence is drained out. The risk is removed. But the aura remains. That is the trick. The object no longer fires. But its legitimacy still does. And that is why this is not mainly a gun story. It is a legitimacy story. The display set takes one of the most powerful figures in the American founding imagination and turns him into something intimate, ownable, and domestic. George Washington is not only remembered here, he is miniaturized, packaged, portable, safe enough for display but still charged with the emotional residue of origin, sacrifice, command, and victory. That is a very modern move. Because we live in a time when power no longer depends only on institutions, titles, or office. It also depends on how a person stages himself, what he surrounds himself with, what his objects imply, what his room says before he says anything at all. And that bedside table said a lot. Not in a loud way. In a careful way. In the kind of way that only works when symbols do the talking for you. That is where the Washington set becomes especially revealing. The lid image is not random. It invokes Washington crossing the Delaware, one of the most iconic images in American civic memory. The Metropolitan Museum of Art notes that Emanuel Luzzi's painting became an especially powerful national image, far beyond simple documentary history. It became a symbolic scene of leadership under pressure, a dramatic crossing through danger, a moment where risk and destiny fused into one image. So when that image sits above the flintlock in the box, the arrangement becomes almost too perfect. Myth in the lid. Force in the box. Narrative above. Instrument below. The image tells you what the weapon means. This is not random patriotism. This is structured memory. And if you follow that logic one step further, the meaning becomes sharper. Because George Washington carries a very specific kind of authority in American culture. He is not merely a leader. He is a founder. And founders are different. A founder is rebellion that became legitimacy. A founder is risk that became order. A founder is disruption that became the new center. That makes Washington one of the most useful symbolic figures imaginable for a modern power holder who wants to appear rebellious, necessary, and historically justified all at once. And that is where Elon re-enters the frame. Not as the whole story, but as the doorway into it. Because a platform-era billionaire displaying a Washington-coded object is not the same as an ordinary collector hanging antique decor on a wall. This happened in the middle of public battles over speech, platforms, power, legitimacy, and authority. The same bedside table image also included the Deus Ex gun replica and Diet Coke cans, which journalists immediately read as clues about identity and self-presentation rather than mere clutter. That context matters, because once the image circulates online, the bedside table stops being private furniture. It becomes an interface. The room becomes a post. And when the room becomes a post, every object turns into a sentence. The Washington set says something very particular. It says, I am not only near power. I am near origin. I am not only part of the current system. I stand close to the story that authorized the system in the first place. That is an extraordinary symbolic move, especially because the object is a replica, not the real weapon, not the real battlefield, not the real crossing, not the real founding crisis. And yet it still carries the glow. That opens a deeper pattern we should pay attention to. Modern elites often want the moral electricity of founding struggle without paying the founding cost. They want the aura of rebellion without the instability, the prestige of sacrifice without the deprivation, the image of anti-tyranny courage without the mortal exposure. A boxed Washington flintlock is perfect for that. It allows a later figure to touch founding legitimacy through symbolic ownership rather than lived ordeal. In other words, the founding glow can be inherited through display. That is why this object belongs to a bigger system. Not just American history, not just memorabilia, not just guns. A bigger system. The system where monuments become merchandise, where national memory becomes collectible, where public myth gets reduced to private props, and where powerful people arrange those props to tell a story about themselves. That may be the most important layer here. Because the George Washington display set is not only about history being remembered, it is about history being repurposed. This is what happens when founding memory enters the market. Product listings for this kind of set explicitly sell a packaged experience, a non-firing reproduction pistol, a Washington image, a brass plaque, a presentation box. The point is not operational use. The point is tactile proximity to patriotic origin. And once memory can be bought in a box, it can also be staged in a frame. That is how the monument comes home. In older civilizations, legitimacy often required monumental architecture, temples, palaces, archives, official rituals. You went to the sacred center. Now the sacred center can arrive by delivery. Now the founder can sit in a wooden box beside the bed. Now authority can be miniaturized, aestheticized, and photographed. And once it is photographed, it can circulate. That circulation is part of the meaning. Because the photo did what the box was always designed to do. It made the past portable. It made national memory intimate. It made the revolution decorative without fully stripping it of force. And that last point matters more than it seems. Because decoration sounds harmless. But symbolic decoration is one of the oldest political technologies in the world. Crowns decorate. Standards decorate. Monuments decorate. Portraits decorate. Relics decorate. And yet through that decoration, whole systems of legitimacy are maintained. So what we are really looking at here is not a quirky old pistol set. We are looking at an example of how power borrows from the archive, how the present reaches back for ancestral blessing, how new forms of authority still want old forms of sanctification. And suddenly, that Washington set no longer looks small. It starts to look like a transfer device, a bridge between founding America and platform-era personal power, a bridge between public monument and private image, a bridge between revolutionary memory and elite self-staging. And once you see that, the rest of the bedside table starts to make more sense too. The Deus Ex gun points forward into cybernetic control, engineered futures, and techno-sovereign imagination. The Washington gun points backward into founding struggle, anti-tyranny mythology, and Republican origin. The Diet Coke can anchor the whole thing in industrial routine, stimulation residue, and modern behavioral scaffolding. The Dorge adds another register of force, but this time spiritual, ritual, concentrated. And together they stop being random objects. They become a symbolic sentence. Past legitimacy, future control, daily optimization, sacred intensity, one table, one identity architecture. And that may be the real lesson here. Because the George Washington flintlock display set shows us that even in an age obsessed with the future, power still wants to be blessed by the past. Even in a technological civilization, origin still matters. Even in a world of algorithms, platforms, and media velocity, the old symbols do not disappear. They shrink. They travel. They get boxed. They get staged. They get posted. And they keep working. Not because they are operational, but because they are legible. Because they still tell people who belongs near authority, who belongs near origin, and who wants to be seen as more than merely rich or influential. That is why this object matters. It is not just a replica. It is a legitimacy prop, a portable founding relic, a quiet little machine for borrowing national memory. And maybe that is the strangest part of all. The modern world keeps telling us it has moved beyond monuments, beyond myths, beyond relics, beyond sacred objects. But then a single bedside photo appears, and suddenly we are back in the old world again. A world where objects still crown people. A world where memory still anoints power. A world where the right symbol, placed in the right frame, can say more than any public statement ever could. If this topic made you see the world a little differently, leave a like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more. Look closer, see further, decide for yourself. Thank you for time.